Hi, everyone. It's Marlene Chism here. And today I'm going to be talking about 3 disruptive relationships, how to spot them, and what to do. And as usual, I'll be checking in occasionally between points. So if you're here, let me know by posting a comment or your name and where you're from. And let's see where people are coming from today. Again, this is 3 disruptive relationships, how to spot them, and what to do. And as you'll notice, I have marlenechism.com/office hours on the banner on this page. And that's because I've created a special report. And in the special report, it has 7 disruptive relationships. And it is available. I'm going to start doing learning guides. So um, if you want to get the learning guides for each month's LinkedIn Learning office hours, you can go to this page, maybe take a snapshot of this screen, marlenechism.com/office hours, and you'll sign up. Yes, you will be on a list. I don't plan on bombarding you, but I will let you know when there's new materials ready or when I'm going to be on office hours. And usually I do that once a month, and I'm going to start providing some learning guides. So the good news is that you can use this in your lunch and learns with your team, or you can review it later. Sometimes I find if I have notes, it's easier to review information. So that's what I'm going to do for some of the office hours. It's going to be different every single month. So yes, you'll have to sign up every single time because later we might offer these for sale. So get the freebies while they last. So I'm going to check in. Hi, Daniela. Great to see you. And Brittany, Yvette, hi, been a long time from Springfield. Joseph, glad to see all of you. Okay, well, I'm going to get started, and you can post. I'll read these later if I don't get to them while I'm on live. I'm the worst multitasker, so I like to focus, and I hope that this content just gives you something to look at from a wide lens. So I'm going to start by saying that when I was writing my book, From Conflict to Courage, I used a resource, Pollock Peace Building Systems. It's a great website. He's really studied conflict. I believe he's an attorney. And so I really studied a lot of his links and a lot of his research. And he said that employees in the United States spend approximately 2.8 hours engaged in conflict, which equals a full day of productivity each month. Now, maybe that sounds bad. Maybe you're judging that, but let me say this. My position is that conflict itself is not the problem. That we're engaged in conflict is not the problem. The real problem is mismanaged conflict and what it does to relationships. So mismanaged or unresolved conflict is really the problem. And that shows up in our relationships. So I'm going to be sharing with you today the 3 disruptive relationships, 3 out of the 7 that I've written about, how to spot them and what to do. And my thinking is this: no matter where you are on the hierarchy, you're a beginning employee, you've been there a while, you're a supervisor, a middle manager, a director, a senior executive, C-suite. No matter where you are, this is going to give you a wider lens from which to view workplace relationships. So here's the format for today. I'm going to name the relationship. Then I'm going to describe what I think is the real problem. And to be fair, there may be several real root problems, but I'm going to describe a real problem, a root problem, and what to do. And the 3 I'm going to talk about today is a disruptive top performer, a disorderly peer, and a disagreeable boss. So I'm going to talk about the relationship, the problem, and what to do. And I'm going to check in once again to see if anyone else is here. I'm seeing a lot more people joining, so go ahead and put your name and where you're from in the chat. And you can get today's special report at marlenechism.com/office hours. You'll have to sign up for it. There's going to be a new one every month. If you're joining this after the live, this one may not be available if you're seeing this a month later. So we're in toward the end of March right now. So if you're in middle of April, you're probably not going to get this one, but you'll get the next one if you want to sign up nonetheless. So let's talk about the first relationship, which is a disruptive top performer. A disruptive top performer. Now, you're going to see this relationship differently depending on if you're a peer, an employee, a boss. So I'm going to speak mostly to those in charge on this one. The disruptive performer is like the rainmaker is a bully. The top salesman berates team members. The neurosurgeon screams at the nurses. So top performers. When top performers are disruptive, it's often justified because some of their qualities are overvalued. And they are valuable people because they perform. But what's undervalued and often unnoticed is the reality of high turnover, retention issues, and the ongoing effects of a toxic work culture. When you're at the top, you see this differently because you like the performance. When you're up here, you dread to be around this person. It makes people quit. So here's the real problem. The real problem is that behavior is not considered to be part of performance. Therefore, bad behavior is justified instead of corrected. And then the behavior allowed becomes the standard. So if you're in a position of leadership, here's what to do. You make behavior part of performance. This is going to be a strategic decision. It's going to be a conversation. It's going to be new policy. So it's not easy, but you can do it. And if a high performer, for example, does not get along with the team, that is part of performance. If 3 people quit because of harsh treatment, that is a performance issue. Behavior then becomes part of performance. It's not separate from performance. This shift is not going to happen without top leaders deciding it's going to be so. So if you're not in a top leadership position, maybe you share this video with your top leadership to let them consider this idea. There needs to be a conversation first and then a policy update. It's a strategic move. It's not easy to do. And by the way, it's not really fair to totally blame the disruptor because the culture has supported this behavior from the beginning. And to be fair, people do what works for them. So the behavior allowed then becomes the standard. So I'm going to check in. Hi there. I'm seeing Norma and Kim and Monique and Pam, Marty. Glad to see that you're here. People from all over, from Fort Lauderdale, Alabama, Ireland, Denmark, Vancouver. We've got a group of people from all over the country. So the second one we're going to talk about is disorderly peer. This is a disruption between equals. So what you want to think here is manager to manager, like board of directors, maybe board of directors with executive director, which is not really equal, but they're close. Investors, business masterminds, and the like. Anywhere where there's peers and there's disruption. Here's the challenge. When everyone considers themselves to be a leader of sorts, it can get really messy. And I'm thinking board of directors here because I see a lot of dysfunction in the nonprofit world among board of directors. And it can get really messy when you don't understand the rules and your role and so on. Then the difficulties occur. We don't really understand how decisions are made or how to resolve conflict. And how do we bring it up when the power dynamics are equal? So here's the real problem, and I talk about this in my book, From Conflict to Courage. The real problem here is leadership clarity. There's no system for taking charge when disruption happens, because when everyone's powerful, now I'm talking about more powerful positions, but disruption between peers on the front line usually is going to be resolved eventually by a higher level person. But when everybody's on the same level, it becomes kind of tricky. Especially when there's no system, if we haven't talked about it in advance. So here's what to do if you're in this situation, or if you're getting ready to join like a nonprofit board or some sort of peer group, and you always think it's going to be fun, but a lot of times there's conflict. So here's what to do. Define the purpose of the role, your role and everyone else's, and the purpose of the group. And so you do this in advance. And then in orientation, you want to define the nature of the work, the purpose of the roles, the group. The best time to set these expectations, as you know, is in the beginning. And the next best time to set it is when you notice the disturbance before it gets out of hand. So if you're noticing this is becoming disruptive, you've got to bring that elephant into the room and say, I'm feeling some discomfort. It's seeming like we're getting off track. We're fighting about petty issues. And we need to regroup and figure out how we can all align and work together. What's going to be our decision-making process for when we have conflict? You know, who's in charge of the meeting? Each meeting, do we have a new person because people are taking over and taking the stage from each other? So you've got to be able to bring this elephant into the room. It's better to do it beforehand. And if it's written down, it's in the bylaws or it's in some sort of agreement, it's a lot easier to say, hey, you know what? I just noticed we're really getting off track. And when we started this group, we decided X and now we're doing Y. It's a way to bring it forward and let the rules be the guide. So I'm going to check in really quick. I'm also going to say, if you see marlenechism.com/office hours, that's where you can get the special report to read about it in more depth. I see Artie, who I met in Germany, and she's asked a question. Do you think sometimes behavior and team values, as well as roles and responsibilities, can be disguised with getting things done? Yeah, I do, Artie. I'd love to talk about that sometimes. I think sometimes we just have busy work, and it's the concept of sharpen the saw. Sometimes we need to just slow down, sharpen the saw instead of continuing to work ineffectively. So yes, I do think it's disguised sometimes as I get things done, and therefore I'm going to be rude, I'm going to be crass, or I'm going to break in. And there can be truth to that, but it can also be a distraction. So there's less of that when we're all in agreement about what we're here to do and how we're here to do it. So I think, yes, bring that elephant into the room with your group. And of course, it matters where you are on the hierarchy, right? It feels scarier to do that if you're lower. And then if you're up here with someone, that feels like it can be politically bad. So I get it. All these different layers in conflict add to our confusion. Hi, Kay. Great to see you. And hi, Lisa from Pittsburgh. Okay, I'm going to go forward with the next one. So now we've talked about disruptive top performer. We've talked about disorderly peer, and we're going to now talk about disagreeable boss. So if you're a boss, listen to this from that perspective. But what I'm going to say is most of us, almost every one of us, has had a boss at some point in our career. Even if we're the boss now, we have had bosses and we've had disagreeable bosses. I know I had a disagreeable boss when I was working in a factory many, many, many years ago. And I had great bosses too, but I had one that would say, that's just the way it is. I didn't ask you to work here. And if you don't like it, find yourself another place to work. Well, I'll give away my age, but this was back in the 80s and 90s. And it was very much top down, even from a middle management perspective. That doesn't work so much anymore. It's a new economy. We've had quiet quitting. It doesn't work anymore in most industries, but there's still disruptive or disagreeable bosses. So they can come off as being very aloof, being disengaged, argumentative, or even micromanaging. And I'll tell you what, that micromanaging, that's a whole conversation. I might do a program on that because honestly, I've micromanaged. I still do sometimes. And I think most of us do. It's about getting the definition. What does that really look like? Instead of just throwing that out there and accusing ourselves or our bosses about what micromanaging is. But any type of disagreeable boss where you just don't get along, you don't gel, that's a disruptive relationship. Now, in my book, From Conflict to Courage, I share the story of a father and son and a small business. It was the father's business. It was a construction business, and the father was very command and control. It was his business, and he was always having outbursts. His son was just trying to help him. His son was very logical, very professional. So here you have a family dynamic in a business. You have a blue collar, that was the father. You have the white collar, that's the educated, college educated son trying to make the business move forward. And there were so many clashes, so many problems between the two of them. And you would think we're related, we're on the same page. My son is brilliant, he wants to help me. But instead, it was just headbutting. And so, what's the real problem here? The real problem is there's many, 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 but a real problem is a lack of clarity and a lack of boundaries. So when the conversation is about who's right, who's wrong, turf wars, then the focus is on the distraction instead of the end result, and it's about ego instead of productivity. So here's what to do. You have to decide what's no longer acceptable. And I would say that that would be for either the father or the son. Get clear on the rules. If you don't want your son helping in this way, you can set that rule, but then he may decide he doesn't want to work there if he can't use his talents. For the son, who's obviously in the lower position, what's no longer going to be acceptable? Why would you stay in a dysfunctional relationship? You've got talents. It's not up to you to make your dad's business successful. What is no longer acceptable? Set an appropriate boundary. Decide in advance what you're no longer going to tolerate. I could do a whole program on boundaries. I've done many programs on boundaries. Most of us have a lot of problem in that area. But in the short, you have to understand your choices. And then depending on your financial situation or your career desires, you then make a choice, and you may have to navigate slowly until you get some things in place. But let's face it, life is just too short to be working with a disagreeable boss. So I'm going to go through again and just tell you what the three are. The three that I talked about today is disruptive top performer, disorderly peer, and then disagreeable boss. There's four more that I talk about in the special report at marlenechism.com/office hours. I've said this before. If you want the learning guide or special report or whatever material I'm building for that month, you have to go sign up for it. And just because you're signed up won't mean that you'll get the next one. I know that it's unfortunate to do it that way, but I am just giving these as free resources. My goal is to collect people that like my work, and so that I can let them know when I'm doing other office hours. I don't plan to bombard you with emails. You can always opt out after you get your freebie, but if you'll go register for that, you can get it, download it, you can share it with others. So here's the conclusion. When there's unresolved conflict, there's dysfunctional relationships, and where there's dysfunctional relationships, there's unwanted outcomes. So I'm going to say, if you got value today, put a little note in the thread. Tell me what your questions are, what your challenges are, what kind of value you got. And if you would, share this on your own page and let people know. I love for you to share my content. It's totally okay for you to share it and to give your comments, your thoughts. And I hope to see you next month. I haven't decided what I'm going to talk about, but if you've got ideas or something you'd like for me to talk about, feel free to message me or put it on this thread. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next month.